It is a matter of proud privilege for me to read the citation of our today's keynote speaker, Shri Anuj Garg. I quote, Mr. Anuj Garg is a visionary IT leader and a blockchain evangelist working on leading technologies for last 20 years. He has vast experience in IT solutions, designing and development, service delivery, process re-engineering, account management, transformation, client management, etc. He is currently working as innovation and automation leader in IAM GTS. He has worked as program manager, global DPE, and transformation leader in his past assignments. Some of his achievements include multiple patents in blockchain, shared IT management, server build, and several prestigious awards like Leadership Award for Strategy and Innovation, Technical Excellence Award, Service Delivery Quality Award, etc. have been awarded to him. He has led several key initiatives for automation, process optimization, delivery models, and relationship building. His recent achievements include building the automation strategy and delivering 142% results in automation. He built Japan IoT in India from scratch and achieved 400 plus FTE live in a short span of time. Mr. Anuj Garg is also leading an initiative in IBM Academy of Technology for introducing automation as a service. In his past assignments, he has worked with Infosys, ST Microelectronics, Daewoo Telecom, etc. He is PMP and ITIL certified with IBM certifications on project management, Bluenix, and blockchain. Mr. Anuj has a keen interest in blockchain technology and is an IBM certified blockchain consultant. He has successfully designed several blockchain applications on Hyperledger and Ethereum platforms. He is also a blockchain coach and has trained hundreds of technology professionals in this revolutionary technology. He is currently working on developing an end-to-end blockchain-based technology solution in the medical domain. I unquote. Shri Vaishnav Vidyapit Vishwavidyalaya Indore, India is privileged to present this citation to Shri Anuj Garg for gracing ISAGA 2021 as keynote speaker on September 9th, 2021. Sir.
So I invite Mr. Anuj Garg to deliver the keynote on blockchain in the gaming industry.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jigyasu, and thank you, Dr. Namit, for the introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the esteemed audience. And it's really been a privilege to be here with all of you. And so, as Dr. Namit mentioned, I have been working on a lot of blockchain-related initiatives. Gaming is relatively a bit new for me, and I'm not a avid gamer, but I take a lot of interest in implementing blockchain-related solutions in various industries. And the good point about the gaming and blockchain is that both of them are growing very, very rapidly. While blockchain adoption worldwide is growing at the rate of 80%, and we are expected to reach by 2023 10% of the world economy on blockchain. The gaming industry is also close to becoming a $200 billion industry, growing at the rate of almost 20% year on year. So when the two verticals, one a industry vertical and another is technology vertical, growing at such a rapid rate, there is always a possibility of the opportunity to integrate the best of both worlds, to achieve some kind of a benefits. So therefore, while blockchain is mostly associated with finance industries, cryptocurrencies, etc., but in the last 2-3 years, it has been found that it has a penetration across most of the industry verticals. So the finance industry being the first, then we have supply chains, we have medical domain, we have government and projects and various other formats. And if you see the hype curve of blockchain industry in gaming, currently it's on top. So most of the gaming companies are considering building the blockchain-based games now because they see the inherent advantage of building the blockchain-based ecosystem. For not only with respect to the monetization, but also with respect to the user experience of how the games are being currently played. So before going to what benefits we can see with the blockchain and what it can do to the gaming industry, I'd like to spend a few minutes just to introduce what blockchain technology is, because some of the audience might be a bit new to this technology. So what blockchain technology is, how it works, and how basically what are some of the key attributes. I'll not go into detail because the time is limited. But I'll just like to have a brief introduction. Maybe I can share a couple of slides with all of you. I hope my screen is visible. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is about the introduction and evolution of blockchain. So the blockchain technology is evolved with the evolution of internet. While the internet is an excellent source for communication, where we can exchange text, images, programs, videos, and anything. It's not really meant to exchange anything of value, like money, like any kind of an IP, like music, patents, or asset, anything that has got a value. Internet is currently not enabled to do the transactions unless we have some kind of a centralized control around that. So therefore, we have various central authorities based organizations such as banks, such as exchanges, such as e-commerce companies. So all these companies are basically revolves around providing the services to the end users where they can exchange some kind of an asset on the internet. So the problem with these kind of a setup is that when you have a centralized control for the assets that you actually own, then you pay a lot of fees to these companies in terms of a transaction fees. And then there is always a single point of failure because these companies have a centralized control to your entire data. If you take an example of a bank, so bank essentially would not reveal that how your money is being used by various banks, and so you might actually end up seeing various examples where the banks are getting failed and people end up losing their money. So what blockchain technology does is it completely changes the spectrum of how the assets are exchanged on the internet. So it gives you a platform where on using a decentralized way, or creating a decentralized database, you can still achieve the same level of trust and transparency that you can achieve using a normal centralized database kind of a system. So as you can see here, the industry is growing with the rate of 80%, and if you see the hype curve, the blockchain and gaming is right here, almost on the top. Okay, so I'll not go into the details of growth and all, but I'll just cover this particular slide to introduce, what is actually a blockchain. So blockchain is basically incorruptible digital ledger. Incorruptible digital ledger is because the ledger or the data that you put on a blockchain database remains incorruptible and immutable at all point of time through the cryptographic security. Okay, so we basically put a cryptographic guarantee, the use of hash and asymmetric cryptography makes sure that the data that goes onto the blockchain layer always remains secure and always remain unhackable. Now, having said that, there are cases, where the blockchain is also hacked, but that's mostly at the application layer. But if you see that the data layer, till now at least, it has not been compromised. And so the blockchain is an incorruptible digital ledger of economic transactions that can be programmed to record not just the financial transactions, but virtually everything of value. So, normally our databases are relational databases like SQL, Oracle, and all. But in a blockchain, we create the blocks where we put the data and connect them through the cryptographic signature or the hashes. So by this way, what we are able to do is, we are able to completely remove the centralized control the data becomes immutable and is distributed across the entire audience. And because we cannot delete anything, it's always audit ready. It's much more efficient than a conventional centralized control-based system. So, what we are doing using a blockchain technology, we are moving from an inefficient, expensive, and vulnerable system, a centralized system, to a shared, replicated, permission system with a consensus. Consensus basically means is that all the parties which are basically participants in the blockchain ecosystem needs to provide some kind of a consensus, or needs to have some kind of a consensus before anything is written on blockchain. So it's kind of a democratization of a data, where all the participants have some kind of a say, rather than a central party controlling everything, with the provenance, immutability, and finality. So you can always trace back any transaction at any point of time, and it remains immutable at every point of time. So these are some of the basic functionalities of the blockchain ecosystem. Now, coming to the world of gaming, and how some of the things of blockchain basically relate to the gaming industry. So any kind of an ecosystem that is present on internet requires some kind of a security framework around it. So gaming industry, one of the key pain points of users, when they install game, or when they use games, or when they basically are running the games on their machines or mobile phones, is the worry about the security and the the spyware that are associated with some of these games. So when you have the security vulnerabilities, you are always skeptical about using those software, and therefore you will find many places where the games are not allowed or banned, or etc. etc. So what blockchain does is, because it has inherent security layers built within it. Okay, so it makes sure that whatever data goes in and out of the system is cryptographically secured, and whatever you are putting on the system is also secured using the hashes. So therefore, the overall system becomes much more secure. And if you are using a blockchain-based gaming software, you can be rest assured that your transactions cannot be hacked. Your data remains secure, and it's much less vulnerable than a conventional centralized ledger-based system. So that's one of the major advantages. One of the major advantage of using a blockchain-based gaming system. Another advantage is that because the cryptocurrencies now are getting largely adopted, by various countries, various states, and they are the standardized way of basically doing the transactions. It's becoming the next norm, and even countries are introducing their own cryptocurrencies in the market. So basically when you do it, any kind of a transaction, financial transaction, to purchase anything from the game, so you can use, or you can take advantage of a cryptocurrency based system to do that. So that way it is much more standardized, it is much more simpler. And then because the cryptocurrencies does not have the overhead of a banking system, so obviously you will need to pay much less. Your transaction fees will be much less, if you pay versus if you pay using a credit card or a debit card or a net banking. So that's another advantage that the blockchain technology can offer in the gaming world. The third and one of the major advantage of the blockchain is the use of something called as non-fungible tokens. Okay, so in a, maybe I'll stop sharing this. So one of the major innovations in the recent time with the help of blockchain technology is the concept of NFTs, on non-fungible tokens. The concept of non-fungible tokens is that you can define your own digital assets with a certain price tag, and then you can monetize those on a decentralized exchange. And this started getting very famous with the CryptoKitties concept, and then now you will see that NFTs are being created for almost everything. If somebody wants to protect their music, their movies, any kind of an asset or an art, any kind of a work that you want to protect and sell it without getting misused on internet, you use the concept of non-fungible tokens. So normally, the games have different kinds of assets. Like, you can have, different widgets, you can have swords, you can have guns, you can have skins, you can have various kind of an assets. And those assets are not necessarily usable in only one game. They can be used in multiple games. So instead of creating a centralized system where the users need to purchase all these kind of an asset from a centralized gaming console, of course, with the security vulnerabilities, we can think of creating the non-fungible tokens or a decentralized exchange-based systems where these assets, which are generally reusable across multiple games, can be bought directly from a decentralized exchange. So the benefit would be that one, you would be paying less premium for buying these kind of a tokens. The second would be that even if you prefer not to play one game after a certain period of time, or if a game shuts down, still your assets do not go in vain. Rather, you can reuse those assets in various other games that you play. Okay, so non-fungible tokens, I think, have a very vast scope and adoption in the blockchain technology, and there are already some games like Alien Worlds, which are using some of these concepts. The other is that you can create a decentralized exchange, or we call it as DEX. The decentralized exchanges are those exchanges where you can trade in assets without a control of a centralized authorities. Like Uniswap is one of the biggest example of decentralized exchange in the crypto world. So you can create a decentralized exchange for the assets that you generally use in a gaming software. So that way, you can easily trade or you can easily swap various assets with each other. So for example, a coins for a particular game can be swapped with another coins for another game, if you prefer to play that. And that way you can also monetize, the value for, different assets that you use in different games. So creating a decentralized exchange, I think some of the companies or some of the startups in the blockchain ecosystem are creating those kind of a decentralized exchange, where, we can use the assets that are used in game to basically exchange with each other. So that's another, and because blockchain is a distributed ledger, and every transaction that you do on a distributed ledger is visible across all the nodes. So another major advantage that is generally associated with the blockchain technology is the transparency. Okay, so transparency means that basically anything is not hidden from the network. You can see that which transactions are being done by whom, although you cannot associate an identity with the actual person, but still you can see that what all transactions are happening at what stage. So any kind of a attack or any kind of an attempt to basically goof up with your data is not very easy especially on a distributed network kind of a thing. So that's another way in which the blockchain technology can be used. One of the very interesting concept that the blockchain technology is being used is to create a digital identity. Okay, so now if you see, our identities are controlled by the central authorities, like the driving license, passport, and everything that we have are basically centralized controlled. Now, a new world which is emerging are working on decentralized identity. The countries like Dubai and Estonia are already having these kind of systems in place. So similarly, in a gaming world also, you can create a digital identity of a person that can be reused across multiple games. And that identity can hold certain credentials or credits that can again be used in multiple games together. Okay, so the advantage of using that is that you don't have to sign up whenever you are playing a new game. So your existing identity or a decentralized identity that's associated with your wallet can be reused, and then you don't have to basically earn the credits again and again while you play the new game. So you can reuse some of the credits that you have from your earlier game. So that's another major use of the blockchain technology in the gaming world. Most of the the games that we play today are transitioning from a single player game to a multiple player game. So I was reading an article which says that at least 60% of the gamers today play multiplayer games. So the multiplayer games when you use a blockchain kind of a system which promotes decentralization and basically helps in bringing people of different identities coming together and create a trusted kind of a system. So that again brings a lot of advantage in playing a multiplayer game. So you cannot be cheated at any point of time. Your transactions will be secure on blockchain ledger. So this is another major advantage that you can achieve using the blockchain technology in the gaming industry. Now what we have also seen in the recent time is that there are different consortiums that are getting built for gaming industry in blockchain, where the different gamers, different industries, and different experts in different domains are basically coming up together to define the standards of using blockchain technology in the gaming industry. And it's a mix of public and private blockchains. So public blockchains is where anyone can come and join and do the transactions. Permissioned or private blockchains are where you need a certain credentials before you can become the part of the network. So I mentor some of the startups in the blockchain domain, and I'm associated with one of the company in Gurgaon, India, which is working on creating a decentralized exchange for gaming. So similarly, many companies are coming up and trying new standards of innovations in gaming industry for blockchain. Okay, so these were some of the thoughts that I could come up with and share with all of you, which would be a great advantage of using blockchain in the gaming industry. Of course, there are integrations possible along with artificial intelligence, along with VR, along with IoT-based devices. When we integrate all these technologies together, along with blockchain, it can define an altogether new spectrum and altogether a new experience for the users of the gaming industry. I think these were some of the thoughts that I wanted to share. I'm more than welcome any questions or anything, any area of discussion on this.
Is there any questions from the panelists? Yeah, it was a very nice session, Anuj. But actually, in spite of this due consideration, still we face the problem of the security. In recent years, that means the transaction about that was hacked. So that means for general people that prevents to adopt this type of technology. So what is your say regarding to this security features?
See, as I told, security is one of the inherent features of blockchain technology, and therefore, it is one of the prime use case even for cyber security solutions. The way we achieve the security is by encrypting the blockchain transactions through state-of-art cryptography, like your asymmetric cryptography algorithms like RSA and all. And then also when we secure the transactions in the ledger, they are also secured through state-of-the-art hashing techniques like SHA-256 or SHA-3. These kind of algorithms are used to basically secure your data onto the ledger. And since it is a distributed ledger, any one ledger getting corrupted by any kind of a security vulnerable will immediately be replicated with the correct copy, because there are algorithms which keep on polling and checking that in case there is any kind of a security breach. So when you compare, I'm not saying that it is completely foolproof, or there is no vulnerability that can ever exist. But when you compare it with any kind of a centralized system, the security footprint, the transaction security footprint, the data security footprint increases by multiple folds. So when you have a blockchain based games that you're installing on your mobile phone or your desktop, or even if you're playing for a website, you can be much more rest assured that your data will remain secure, the transactions will remain secure, and you're less susceptible to any kind of a cyber attack. It's a proven thing. I think there are a couple of papers in the journals as well, which has been published, and there are several patents also in the gaming industry to prove that the security vulnerabilities can be addressed using the blockchain technology to the larger extent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sajid. Any more questions from anyone?
Thank you for the conversation. It's helped me understand blockchain a little more. I'm interested in the connections between it and the cryptocurrencies. I know you touched on it, but I noticed that the country that has made cryptocurrency part of its finance system is encountering a lot of problems. I'm just wondering where the connections are, perhaps. Are cryptocurrencies going to be a thing of the future, or are they, is the blockchain system going to make, other financial systems safe, therefore we don't need the cryptocurrencies?
Okay, yeah. So I think that's a very good question, Dr. Elizabeth. So cryptocurrencies for sure are the future of digital economy. That's for sure, because there is a mass adoption which is already happening, at various stages. Of course, countries and organizations are very skeptical about it, because they are a completely new revolution, and because it eliminates a lot of intermediaries in between. So there is always a fear that what will happen to my transactions and all. But yes, for sure, it is going to drive the future of economy, along with various other financial instruments. Like, for example, blockchain is not limited to only generating cryptocurrencies. It can help you build decentralized exchanges. It can help you let's say, for example, in the financial industry, it can help you with automating the loan cycles. It can help you reducing the landing rates for the loans. It can help you automatically settling the insurance claims. So the use of blockchain is much beyond cryptocurrencies, and cryptocurrencies are also basically can be broken into two categories. One are the general cryptocurrencies, which you can use to purchase any kind of an asset, and another is the token. Token is basically another form of cryptocurrency which does not necessarily have a value on a market or a exchange, but can have a value within a particular ecosystem. For example, if you create a token for a gaming industry, it can become a way to exchange the value from between one game to another. Might not be traded on a conventional crypto exchange. So that's another way to look at the cryptocurrencies. But yes, I think since many e-commerce websites are now allowing cryptocurrencies to do the sale purchase, many e-voucher companies are integrating cryptocurrencies. There is no reason we can have cryptocurrencies based payment systems in the gaming industry as well in the times to come. I think the fear around cryptocurrencies and how they will actually shape up, or the misuse of cryptocurrencies will slowly go away with some more governance, with some more laws around them. Even India is going to launch very soon its own cryptocurrency, digital rupee, which will boost the cryptocurrency market in India as well to a large extent.
Thank you. So they're aligned, but they're not interconnected. They will operate separately, blockchain and cryptocurrencies.
Yes, I mean, the concept of blockchain started with cryptocurrency. You know, the Bitcoin was the first application that came even before the blockchain world came into the picture. But yes, you know, if you see the practical applications of blockchain technology, they are much beyond cryptocurrencies.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. That helps me understand the relationships and the differences. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Dr. Anuj, I have a question that in the technology solutions in the medical domain,
Yes, sir.
how the blockchain can be helpful, how we can have the advancements in this technology in using blockchain.
So in the medical domain, you know, medical domain is in fact one of the domain which is highly progressive when you see the horizontal growth of medical industry. You know, people come up with new medicines, new vaccines, new machines, new procedures. But you know, when it comes to the vertical innovation or adopting a technology, it's still you know, far behind. You will still see doctors giving prescriptions on a piece of paper, you know, and things like that. So you don't have any. So the first problem in the medical industry is a lack of representation of medical data on a digital ledger or a digital platform, which you can share or which you can own. So your own medical history is unknown to you, and it's mostly on the papers that you need to carry to different hospitals, and generally doctors even don't agree to your, you know, they will ask for a fresh reports or all these kind of things. So the first major innovation in blockchain using the medical industry is the concept of electronic medical record, which are secured through the blockchain technology. And you know, the person who owns the electronic medical record is free to share that with any doctor on his will. So basically, you will be owning your medical records. You will be sharing them on need basis. Those electronic medical record and their immutable history can also be used to basically purchase the insurance plan and you know, settle the insurance claims automatically, because you know, the transactions will be all digitalized. It will be on a platform, a digital platform, and the smart contracts, which are the key driving force behind blockchain, will make sure that you know, only the authentic claims are settled. It is settled automatically without any kind of a manual work. So you get rid of all these kind of the insurance desk that you get in hospitals, you know, which ask you for submitting papers, and then it goes to the companies and all that. So all that will eventually go away. The research companies, the medical research companies, will also get a lot of benefits, because you know, they will find a secure and a reliable information. You know, currently what happens, you have medical representatives, they go door to door, collect information, manual in nature, biased in nature. So you know, it will be much more clean, and you know, you will have research outcomes in a very short intervals rather than you know, the amount of time that it takes to be. So industry has lot of benefits, and there are large medical chains which are working to basically create these solutions on top of you know, some of the existing work that has been done for digitalization of medical records. I hope that answers your question, Dr. Namit.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Can I have a quick question?
Sure.
Did you hear me? Yeah, okay. Because like many of us here, like a teacher or a professor work in like educational games, and like what you talk, like for example, to me is so innovative, like something so new, and I just read from paper, like newspaper, and have no knowledge about that. So I would like to ask, like, what's your advice for a teacher or you know, like educator work in games and simulation, but in educational setting? Thank you.
So basically, you're looking for an advice for a teacher who's teaching the games and simulation, right? So that's what your question is.
Yes.
I think, yeah. So I think, you know, so as a technocrat, I can only advise that, you know, include the latest technologies as a part of your curriculum, you know, when you're teaching the students. Okay. So there are a lot of technology penetrations that are happening in gaming industry, like, you know, artificial intelligence, virtual reality. Internet of Things, using various devices which are interconnected together. And then, of course, blockchain, we tried to cover some use cases of blockchain technology today. So whenever, you're taking courses on the gamings and simulation, please try to also take some part of connecting those with the various upcoming technologies that are there in the world. I think that will help students as well to basically go to the next level of understanding.
Thank you. That's
Thank
very helpful.
Sure. So anything else from anyone?
Any more questions from panelists? Thank you so much, Mr. Anuj Garg, for your wonderful session. It was really nice and all we have enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Now I will request Honorable Vice Chancellor Shri Vaishnav Vidyapith Vishwavidyalaya to present citation to Mr. Anuj Garg. So with this, we will take a break of 5 minutes here and we will reassemble here after 5 minutes. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest
Thank
of the
you.
day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
so
Anuj.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, hello.
Morning, Marike. I can't hear you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Vinod, sir.
Marike,
Yes.
yeah,
Sorry,
good morning, sir.
I was
I
still
can hear you.
muted. Good morning.
Okay, that's it. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi,
So,
Paola.
about,
Good to see you.
Nice to
almost
see you.
6:45 over there.
Yes, it is. Nice and early.
I think Christine from Australia is nearby. Somebody who is very close to us from Bangalore is yet to join us. I think it should be here on time. Bharat
I'm here, Vinod. Hi.
Aha, I can hear him, but you can't see him.
Yeah.
Where
Hi.
are you? There you are.
Yeah. Hi.
Hello.
At home or office?
At home right now. I'm a little sick, so usual precautions during these times.
I thought things were better over there.
Things are better in Bangalore. I am a little sick. So right now, because you don't know, right, until you get tested again, it could just be because of the change in weather that I'm just sick or because of all my travel. But right now, for everything, it's better to get a COVID test. So
You have your vaccinations, haven't you?
yeah, all double vaccinated.
Well, then you don't need to go for a test because the test will say, yes, you have an RT-PCR or whatever. So what? They'll say, go back and rest.
I like your trust in the vaccination, Vinod.
Good morning, Paula.
Good morning.
Bharat, Manike, and Christine, your chair is here. Dr.
Great.
Paula Ritzi.
Hello.
And she'll be with you for the next, how long? About 1.5 hours, I think, almost.
It was quite interesting.
Thank you, Paula. You've been traveling, I think. Are you back home? Or are you somewhere in Malaysia or Japan?
I'm preparing to go to Thailand, but today had already. I was wake up at 3:30 because my first class with Thailand was at 4:30 with Thailand. Then this conference. But meanwhile, in the break, I have a meeting with a former student of mine that is in Mexico. So.
Great work. You are my hero.
I was so interested in blockchain, just for my own security. I think that I'm just spreading information around. But thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah.
Around the world in 80 minutes, Paula.
Yeah.
No longer 80 days.
Yeah.
Sir, Vishalyati sir, should we start?
Yeah.
About a minute to go.
Yes, sir. Can we start?
1 minute to go.
1 minute to go.
All right.
Get ready, adjust your ties and the spectacles, look smart, smile.
Sure.
Bharat, you're smiling too much. Yeah, 20. They're ready.
Okay, welcome all of you. Welcome back. Very warm good morning from India and jovial welcome back to one and all present here. I, Architect Vishal Yardi, would like to welcome you all to the plenary session number 3 and 4th day of 52nd annual conference of the International Simulation and Gaming Association ISAGA, organized by Sri Vaishnav Vidyapith Vishwavidyalaya. I welcome today's session chair, Dr. Paula Rezi, Professor of Techniques and Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Sassari, Italy. I welcome Marike the Weisfan, Heswick, Radboud University, Nijmegen, Management Services, Section Intervention Methodology, the Netherlands. I welcome Christine Gunri, writer and community volunteer, Australia, and Mr. Bharat M. Pallavalli, co-founder at the Fields of View and Ashoka Fellow, India, to this platform. We are honored to hear all of you and share your experiences with all of us. Dr. Paula Rizzi is an urban planner and designer. Her realms are urban gaming simulation in participatory design and planning and disaster mitigation. Professor of Techniques of Urban and Regional Planning at University of Sassari, Italy. Visiting professor in universities in Japan, Thailand, Indonesia, and Europe. Member of different boards of scientific committees and advisory board of directors at Computers in Urban Planning and Urban Management. Founder and former director of ISAGA Summer School from 2004 to 2013. Honorary member of ISAGA and SEC-SAGA. She designed urban gaming simulation as Vaddi for Italian Ministry of Environment, and many of her UGS were used as urban planning. Thank you so much, Paula. Now I invite Paula for her welcome address.
Sorry. I would like to thank you, all the wonderful organization of this ISAGA 2021. I was really impressed by the excellent frame that you offered to us and all my colleagues here. And I'm really pleased to chair this third plenary session because, let's say, there is a quite challenging topic that are addressed by the three speakers today, from the effects of effective learning of gaming simulation by Ms. Marieke van der Wiese. That Marieke, forgive me for my pronouns, and I will ask also forgiven me to the others, but this is quite important topic, and also for the topic that is addressed in the speaker by Mrs. Christine Gunri, that is, how to create memorable engagements, how much is important in our domain to understand the importance of emotions and what is the difference of a culture in this. And last but not least, the third topic that is introduced by Mr. Bharat Pallavalli, I think is right, and that is quite important. That is a sort of trio of presentation that for me is fundamental, because it includes culture, it includes diversity, it includes how we can shift or play between quality and quantity when we design and we apply our gaming simulation. So I would like to thank not only the organizer, but also the speaker of the last 3 days. So it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Mrs. Marieke de Wiese van Heswick, that with the first intervention, that is, the title is Effects of Learning Interventions in Simulation Games. Please, Marieke.
Okay, I take over. Thank you for my introduction, Paola. But I owe you, and really a lot, because I visited your summer school and conference in 2004. And that planted the seed for this long-term research after the effects of interventions. So I thank you very much, you and Willie, for this fantastic start of my career in game simulation. And I urge everyone to visit summer school at least once in their lives. Even if you are very experienced, you will learn a lot and have a lot of fun. So I will start my presentation now. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. I first should share screen. I will do that now. Yes. And now it doesn't go into the, now it does go into the presentation mode. I started at results, but I will get there. I've been doing promotion research, PhD research at Radboud University, and I'm an external PhD, but I also do work there at different faculties. I advise the law faculty and the educational sciences and such on their programs and curriculums, because knowing about game design is also knowing a lot about didactics and how to design a fruitful learning environment. And of course, I use sometimes gamification when there's no room for bigger simulations. I started my PhD a while ago because in my career as consultant and game designer, I noticed that the role of the facilitator is quite important in the effects. I really didn't want to be a machine that just executes game simulations, but I kept being asked back while I try to train people in how to facilitate game simulations. I actually got a very boring job by doing many game simulations in many different contexts. But then again, that was a good ground for research because I had to repeat the same games all over again in different contexts. I could tweak and I could test certain things and I could measure certain things. And I found that more and more interesting. But the step to do a promotion was big because I thought, oh, the writing, that is going to be difficult. So it took me until I was 38 till I officially started. But by then, I gathered 15 very relevant case studies, well documented, well transcribed of sessions. And I started talking with Jan Klappers. He lives across the river from where I live. And he said, well, we go for an apple cake and we have a talk on this. And he said, oh, yeah, you're doing well. Well, from all of these case studies, let's pick the most extreme ones. That's also advice from literature. Also, Swanborn has written about that. Let's pick the two most extreme case studies and see what happened there. And I think, oh yeah, that's a good start because we have these many case studies. And how do we make sense of all this material? So I will tell you how that process went and as also what it delivered so far. So I tell a little bit on the setting. I already did that. The research question, the results, and the future publications. I'm very open in sharing my research because I think it's very good to share in science. And I love someone to replicate this research because then we have more evidence, more scientific evidence, more knowledge on contextualized situations as well. My research question. Paula already introduced the why. We look at the impact of facilitator interventions on the learning of participants. But as we all know, context is super important. So it will be nice to see if some factors really influence more than others. And since there's been little research on this topic, we have to be explorative first. So when looking at my conceptual model, you see a lot of variables. And I think it's good to look at it broadly. So the facilitator intervention is influenced by the type of facilitator, type of participant, type of context. And that's really explainable because the type of facilitator, if you remember who were your former teachers, who were really examples for you, what in your educational career, what people stand out and what did you learn from them? That is really important also in game simulations. If you don't like the person guiding the simulation, that can have a huge impact on your buy-in, the way you enter the game simulation. And also if you feel supported or neglected or anywhere in between, really can impact your learning. And also if this person is very loose or very on the control end of doing interventions. So nearly having you not respond and filling in all the questions. Those sessions exist. That looking at those extremes really gives us some insight in what's happening here. And in the model, you see in the type of intervention, you see 3 levels: first order, second order, and third order intervention. And those are levels of learning, and those are convenient levels of learning for socio-technical systems. So for game simulations and where people interact with technology. And technology doesn't necessarily have to be a computer interface or a computer model. Technology is also a design game. And the unique interactions, and I want to stress unique, so that makes every situation special. Every case study is unique in its own sense because the participants bring their own schemata, the facilitator brings their own schemata, the things they bring into the game simulation, like culture, like norms on learning. I will give an example of that. I was in an international asynchronous game simulation, and we had a group of students that was not used to experimental learning. They were used to sitting and learning, because that creates a whole different dynamic and also challenges for a facilitator to get the people learn from the game, as you would in the Netherlands, where many students do many game simulations. So that is a totally different starting point, and it demands different things from you as facilitator to have people learn from the game simulation. I can tell much more on that, but I will save that for my publications. And of course, you can always email me. But back to this first, second, and third order intervention, I find it important to highlight. It comes from Azaris and Schoen. He was, I think, a sociologist, I would name him. And as a sociologist, he looked at learning behavior in organizations on the individual level, on the group level, and on the top level of the whole organization. But these first order and third order learning, you can see on every level, in every participant, in every person. So that makes it very useful to add codes, to make sense of what's happening in the learning process. And first order learning is very simple. It's applying a norm. So I see something happening and I need to do a certain action that is logical in the context. Like I get a message, and according to the procedure of my game simulation, I should put this message through to the other department. And second order learning would be a process learning. So on a process level, a change of process. I've noticed that in the procedure, it says I have to just give through the information, but I've noticed if I read it myself and then negotiate it with my own department, we are better prepared for the next question coming in. So now I've decided that I will do something with the information and I will check the information, and I will also check it with my colleagues. So we are better prepared for the future. And third order learning is more the way I explain it, make that as explicit, is from my role to the environment. How can I add value from my role to the environment? And do I really want to do this? So it's also a fundamental philosophical question. Do I want to be in this role? And if I want to be in this role, what conditions do I need from myself and from others to perform well in this role? And answers to those questions are third order questions. But as always, we have roles in game simulations. So this is a very convenient method to code behavior and make measurements on behaviors in game simulations. Evaluation is a complex and elaborate subject, but you can decompose it. And if you want to really look at what's happening for learning in the gameplay, you can use just this method. And it really works. And I will publish on it soon, but I will first tell you more what I've done with that. So the method, one of the methods of my measurements was looking at during the gameplay on what actions does a facilitator perform and what direct responses come from the participants. And I looked at the gameplay and I looked at the reflections in between the gameplay. So often when you have game simulations with multiple game rounds, you have timeout reflections or reflections. And in these reflections, the facilitator usually has a conversation with his participants on how did it go and what will be good plans for the next round, for instance. So I tracked those relations. And that is one of my publications. Of course, you cannot look inside the heads of people. So you want to do action research as well. I interviewed facilitators beforehand. I interviewed them during simulations and I interviewed them directly after. And I interviewed them 2 months or later. And I followed them over several case studies. So I only have published and working on publications on smaller ones, but the bigger ones are coming too. And I have my own cases because I had this learning experience of 20 years by now in game simulation, first at the university, later for a consulting company. I have my own case studies and I took in that process of where I myself learned from how to approach certain things. A case study research, so by now we have over actually 21 case studies, also longitudinal followed, and experts interviews with many of you, and some of you I haven't contacted yet, but I will in future. And I'm even adding some quantitative analysis because, yeah, if you find such clear patterns, it's not so hard to go from a qualitative analysis to a quantitative analysis. And I don't find it that hard, and we shouldn't be afraid of doing that. But not quantitative analysis on all aspects, just on certain aspects of this study. To refrain from putting things in boxes, we have to look at a holistic whole. So the main thing is qualitative analysis. This is quite a list. I've published one article in the context of this PhD by now, Ethics and the Simulation Facilitator, in the special issue that was released this summer in Game Simulation. And I find it very important to write this article. Maybe people at first don't understand why it's in there because it's on ethics. But as game facilitators, we really should think of what are we recreating. And you cannot think of all the scenarios beforehand. So you always have to evaluate. So we become more and more powerful to create learning environments, but we are manipulators in essence. Eh? I learned that nice sentence also from Elizabeth. So I'm measuring all kinds of things, but what am I measuring and why am I measuring this? And what does that say about the situation? I really have to keep reflecting next to the measurement usage I do. It's a very practical article. Ethics can be very big, but it is a verb and we can be as ethical as we aim to. But read it. I would say it's quick, it's fluently written with the help of Elizabeth. Yeah, it can help you in conducting more ethical your profession. Then an article on the extremes. Huh? So article 2 is on the extremes. And then we are going to do a big comparative case study with many game simulations to extract what worked on the different conditions. And we also test methods in there. So we chose a certain approach. We tested methods in different contexts. And it's very close to evaluation. So I got a chance to write with Willy, and we are going to write a chapter on games and evaluation. And with Elizabeth, we're going to write on culture and ethics and context in another chapter. But the results you probably are interested in the in-between results. Well, the study on ethical facilitation was a literature study and an expert interview study. And the main learnings from that is pay attention to different perspectives and keep learning in context and learn from experience, because you never know what's going to happen. Every context is unique. And we are morally obliged to do this. And therefore, we need to measure more. We need to map more. What are we doing and what is the impact of that? And we shouldn't be afraid of that. And maybe your measurement is not totally 100% accurate, but it always delivers you information. So I urge everyone to do that. And secondly, the article on the extremes, the effects of facilitated interventions in rule-based games. And that was a game that was containing quite a bit of rules and quite a bit of procedures, making the facilitator also in a role of constantly explaining the procedures of the game, explaining the symbols of the game, explaining the word uses of the game, explaining the forms of the game, that distracted the participants very much from learning from the game. And this is why mainly first order learning happened, learning to play the game. And later, a little bit of second order learning. Well, they realized that certain processes weren't working optimal once they learned that. But by that time, it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon and 4 the sessions should be finished. So a big lesson, if you design a too complex game, a game that contains a lot of terms, forms, rules, and procedures, it's going to take off a lot of energy of the germane load. The germane load is the energy that's focused on the learning. And so don't make too complex rule-based games. So that won't work for a learning process. On the other hand, I tested an open simulation game. Open simulation games like a policy game. Good examples are described in the book of Jan Klabbers and of Duke and Geertz, Pathways into the Unknown. There's a free copy available. Mail me if you want it. And there mainly learning happened on the second and third order level. So it's an open game with nearly no procedures, nearly no rules, but just you set people in a good scenario, in a role, like Paola Recci does often and has big success with. Those are excellent games to work with if you want to achieve second and third order learning. But the facilitator there has an even more important role. He or she is not just a referee, stressing the rules and procedures. That person really has to recreate the environment together with the participants and has to be a sort of guide. I always think of that person as sitting in the lifeboat, throwing people in the water, sometimes handing them a floaty or a cracker. So to encourage them to keep learning from the simulation. And they are much less open than you would think, because people have all these schemata and structures in their head, and the game is structured nearly immediately. I will give an example of one of my case studies. It's an organizational change context. Organization changed the structure, but the people didn't change. So they still had these old bureaucratic ideas. And during the first game round, they discovered they are inventing their own rules. If there are no rules, we just invent our rules, and we don't know how we do that and why we do that. So that was questioned in the second game round. And then they could really coach each other to, oh, now you're inventing a rule again. Now you're inventing a strict procedure again. Maybe you should have it or maybe not, but let's experiment with it. And this is how we got them to change the organizational culture during the gameplay. And I have plenty of examples of that, and I'm really excited when that happens. When I'm talking on these case studies. So then it is a very powerful instrument. And yeah, also in those situations, I wouldn't know what other intervention would have helped to get those people farther. They really need a mirror of the game simulation to move beyond what they already know, to develop further. I used some literature. Of course, I want to advertise for the special issue facilitation, because facilitation is really important. It's like you have the car and you have the coureur, the driver, and the car is only as good as the driver is. So if you want to get most out of the simulation, you have this fantastic simulation, but you also have to have a fantastic, well-developed, skilled facilitator. And it's not difficult to facilitate well, but certain approaches you need to handle. You need to professionalize on that. So I would advocate for a summer school and more training on facilitation as a subject, and I really would like to contribute to that. This is, I wanted to tell you that Professor Etienne Rouet and Professor Sander Meijering are my promoters at the Radboud University. There I'm also looking at it broadly. So from an intervention perspective, and a simulation game is a playful learning environment, but what is a simulation game is very different in different cultures. I had case studies in Tunisia, and their play was already what in my country would be called a democratic meeting, that the hierarchy would be let go, and that they would just talk to each other on a certain subject and everyone would bring something in. So they experienced that as tremendously playful. For them, it was really effective learning environment. Well, according to our design standard, it wouldn't even be called a game. But for them, it created experience. So I really want to stress the experience from the participants determines if you are playing a game or not, however well designed and pre-thought of your game is. I thought I would have too little time, but maybe now there's time for some interaction and some questions. Is that allowed, Paula?
If I understand correct, I think that is we are allowed to have a question.
That we can do combined at the end of the session.
At the end of the session. Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Marieke, for your wonderful intervention. A bit longer, maybe, but really clear. And now I would like to invite Mrs. Christine Gonray, that is from Writer and Community Volunteer Australia, to introduce her work that is called Scenarios That Create Memorable Engagement. Please, Christian.
Christine, just wait a minute, please. We need to read your citation first.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Our next speaker, Christian Gunri, is a writer and a community volunteer from Australia. Christian Gunri was a secondary senior teacher in English and history for 15 years before joining the Australian federal government, where she developed policy and programs to address key social issues, including senior policy advisor to the Prime Minister's task force on youth homelessness. On retiring, she took a leadership positions with the ACT National Parks Association and the National Park Australia Council. Following second retirement, she now focuses on creative writing. She won the ACT Emerging Writers Residency in 2017 and has had short stories published in the New York Midnight Short Story Competition and the Scarlet Stiletto Awards. Thank you.
Look, thank you very much for that. This is a huge privilege to be invited to discuss this really important topic, because I think I'm stepping slightly out of I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get this right. Okay. So is that up? My screen is up?
Yep.
Good.
Yes, yes.
I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the land of the Yuin Nation, which has never ceded sovereignty, and to acknowledge their elders past, present, and emerging. I'd like to start with a bit of play, just to help us focus on understanding how words work. And I think after Marieke's wonderful presentation, I can see so many connections between what she was talking about and what I want to talk about today. So let's just have a look at, I'm sorry, I'm just going to fiddle with my screen. She crochets the bizarre creatures of the coral reefs. It's interesting. But so what? I'm not terribly interested in who she is. She creates the bizarre creatures of the coral reefs in crochet. What the hell? I mean, really, who is this person? Crocheting bizarre creatures, crochets for little old lady, bizarre creatures. So just changing words around how we present things is absolutely critical. Now, when I write a professional document, I'm conscious of its very serious purpose. I check carefully for structure, accuracy, logical argument, consistency. The most important thing is to ensure the reader can follow the narrative, follow my train of thought, make sure that they understand my logic and my argument. On the other hand, when I'm writing a novel, I want the reader to stop watching how it's done. I work to create atmosphere, intrigue, to entice the reader into a different place, to share experiences with different people. Writing scenarios is a creative mixture of both these. We want to create memorable scenarios that linger long after the exercise is complete, but they need to have a careful construction, a serious purpose, and also a story that plays around, takes participants to a different place, encourages them to think differently. So the first effective tool, I think, when we want to develop memorable scenarios is to learn from storytellers, to read fiction carefully to see how it works. Now, Agatha Christie was a master storyteller. When she wrote her novel, The Body in the Library in 1942, she had already accumulated nearly 20 years' experience writing compelling scenarios. By the time that particular scenario, she decided to address that particular scenario, it was already a cliche. But she took the premise of Body in the Library, twisted the plot, challenged the stereotypes, concealed and altered facts, added humour, and created one of her most successful novels. If you haven't read it, you really should try and find it. It is astonishing. She was a master at playing a game with us, the reader. You could almost call Christie the first simulation expert, and many detective stories now play her specific games. But today I'm going to use a story, The Invisible Presence, which was written for a competition in 2019. It just shows you how long this trope of the body in the library has fascinated people. So this competition had two very simple rules, 2,000 words, said anywhere, anytime, but it must contain the phrase, the body in the library. So let's have a look at how cliche can be turned into an intriguing, mysterious, strange, and suspenseful scenario. I've put the body in the library, ma'am. Thank you, James. Miranda paused outside the drawing room. Tea at the usual time, I think. Very good, madam. Take a moment. If you'd like to add it in the chat room, tell me what you first thought of when you saw that short conversation. Oh, goody, somebody's typing. I can't see chat. Oh, there's chat. Okay, yes, good. Who's been killed? Excellent. I have to get rid of chat.
Only Willie, only Willie. That one says Earl Grey or India chai tea.
Oh, perfect, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so the juxtaposition of those two conflicting pieces of information opens the story. There is a body and tea at the usual time. By letting the statement stand without explanation, it catches the reader off guard, sets up intrigue, creates confusion. Something awful has happened. Everything is normal. And this demands closer attention. And I wonder if you're already thinking how you could use that particular tool to start off a scenario with a bang. But note, you can't just fling things together to intrigue your players. There needs to be a relationship between the two pieces of conflicting information, not just the juxtaposition. If this read, "I've put the body in the library, madam," and the reply is, "I think we'll have a game of cricket," it doesn't work. It just confuses the participants. There is a certain mysterious logic in library and afternoon tea and Earl Grey, which sets a pattern for what's about to unfold. To tell everything, do we have to play fair in writing a scenario? Miranda studied her father-in-law from the doorway. He was slouched on the gold settee, glowering at his whiskey glass. He'd been there ever since the incident upstairs, ignoring the tumult around him. "She's dead then. We've put the body in the library." Do you think Miranda has actually answered her father-in-law's question? Is she hiding something? What could it be? Or like the rest of us, did you assume a direct connection between dead and body? We can tease with unexplained information. Martha was, oh, I'm sorry, I've gone too far. I'll put it back up. I'm just aware that sometimes it's hard to, asking you to read it. So I've got all the text on the screen. Martha was standing by the kitchen window, watching the big Daimler inch out of the garage and quietly drive around the corner towards the front door. Well, someone is going somewhere tonight, she thought. I'd better get ready for whatever comes next. So when characters are uncomfortable in a scenario with what they see and hear, they are more interesting and the situation becomes more interesting. We read on for an explanation. We work on in a scenario to find out what's going on. In writing scenarios, encourage players to notice unexplained things. Punchline, don't explain them. Using cliche. And who do you think the police will believe, he shouted. You silly woman. You or me, a county magistrate. He was perspiring, but she wasn't. She was standing there cool as a cucumber. He felt suddenly giddy, as if he was teetering on the edge of a cliff. He took another step backwards. So what's interesting there is that the cliche actually works because it's familiar. You can tell your character what the character is feeling. So, I'm sorry, I've lost my place. I'll move on. Yeah. Challenge expectations. It was a letter opener, George, from the desk under the window in your room. I think the police would make something of that, don't you? And the blood stains on your clothes, your hands, your shoes. George wriggled back into the settee and surreptitiously studied his hands. He'd scrubbed them carefully and told Martha to burn all the clothes he'd been wearing, but try as he might, he couldn't get the smell of blood out of his nose. He wanted to forget seeing the girl's shocked face as the knife hit flesh, seeing her crumple to the floor, a red stain spreading over her chest. Now, I have to ask, as you read that, did you feel a sense of sympathy for the murderer? Up until now, he's been a bully and a very nasty character. But he seems to be traumatized by what's happened, by what he's seen, by what he knows he's done. In scenario writing, we set up normal, logical behavior and then challenge it. We need to disrupt expectations. Otherwise, the exercise would be too predictable. Interrupt the plot. Martha entered quietly. I've put his clothes and the knife with blood on it in the library safe as you instructed, madam. She gave a small shudder. And cook asks if you would like mint sauce with the lamb for dinner tonight. Mint sauce would be perfect. Thank you, Martha. We've already seen this juxtaposition of conflicting information and we know it means something, we still don't know what. However, there was something else there. An assumption that the character has got rid of the evidence, is now safe from the police, is suddenly overturned quietly, without fuss. The balance of power in the relationships changes abruptly. And that's a really critical point, I think, in any scenario. We can't let things just flow on normally. That does not challenge people's behaviour or expectations. Linger. This is really critical. I always rush to the end of everything. I read the end of the book before I go too far, just to know if it's going to be worthwhile. But lingering, he watched the spilt tea spread over the carpet, the broken china gleaming in the soft light coming through the windows. He looked around the drawing room with its warm fire and flowers on the polished table by the window, the whiskey decanter always waiting for him on the sideboard, the invisible presence of servants everywhere. When we're writing a scenario, every sentence is part of the structure, part of the purpose, until suddenly there's a pause, a moment that allows reflection, recalibration. Very useful when you want people to assess their position and when you want to build tension. I noticed that Marieke mentioned the pause in between sessions as a way to recalibrate, to rethink. You can actually write that into your scenario as well. Don't lose sight of that. Change of direction. We could convince the servants to keep quiet, we might just be able to cover this unfortunate incident up. He struggled to understand what she was saying. Was she offering to cover up for him? Good God, this was a turn up for the books. He wouldn't have dreamt her capable of such a thing. Go on, he growled. I'm suggesting we say that Nanny had a sudden opportunity to go to Australia with a distant cousin. We make a nice grave for her at the bottom of the garden. She loved it down there. It would actually be nicer than a strange cemetery, and no one will ever find out you killed her. His eyes narrowed suspiciously. And what's your price? What had seemed chaos, strange behaviour, crazy stuff, suddenly shifts into focus. The murderer is being blackmailed. The criminal is himself the victim of a crime. We're familiar with this in stories, but do we bring it into our scenarios where you can just turn everything on its head and ask your participants to recalibrate everything they've understood about the story so far? The change in her expression made him suddenly feel sick. Take a moment to think about what you know of Miranda, to guess what she'll demand. Put in chat if you like. Thank you. Where is the body going? Exactly, not rolls. Okay. So, resolve. You would move to the hunting lodge in Scotland and not come back here ever again. He reeled back. You're mad. And you would hand over full control of the estate to me in guardianship for the children. The immensity of what she was proposing stunned him. His weak, spineless daughter-in-law was blackmailing him, all because some silly girl had pulled a knife on him when he just wanted a cuddle. So much changes here very quickly. Meek, quiet Miranda is covering up a murder, is blackmailing her father-in-law. But by now the setup should have done its work. It doesn't stretch credibility. We've seen George feeling dizzy, unable to get the smell of blood out of his nostrils. We've seen him looking around, feeling the rising tension, the sense of things being strange, of people behaving oddly. We now recognise the quietness in Miranda that we thought was fear was in fact determination. And I love that in games, when a character just suddenly, under instruction from you or from something that happens inside that person, they just change the game completely. The strangeness of Miranda's behaviour was part of a well-crafted plot to blackmail her father-in-law. Let's go back to that first scene. I've put the body in the library, ma'am. Thank you, James. Miranda paused outside the drawing room. Tea at the usual time, I think. Very good, madam. Now we see that that was staged to do things, to make sure George knows that the victim Nanny has died, and to set up this inexplicable behaviour of normal tea time to confuse him. But the writer is not yet finished with George. We can still build tension. Even when you think something is resolved, it's not resolved. He thought of that cold, still body in the library, of police tramping all over his life, poking and prying into all the dark corners of his affairs, of the silly girls he had chased and kissed. He thought of Martha standing at the door, listening to everything he said, knowing everything he had done over the years, and James prowling the house, poking around in his desk, reading his mail. He wouldn't be able to breathe without permission. Suddenly he realised they were standing there, Martha and her bloody husband, the butler, staring at him. Witnesses, George, Miranda said, and he guessed she meant more than just watching him sign the damn paper. So, sorry, I'll leave it at that. Using a character's point of view is much stronger than simply telling participants something has happened. We feel the character's increase in tension when he sees the new characters arrive without introduction or explanation. When he hears an explanation, it increases.
Oh.
Okay.
What happened there?
Surprise. Don't know. Doesn't matter, does it?
Dr. Dubey, the recording stopped.
Yes, please continue. We will check the.
Go on. Go on. I'm at the climax.
We want it on the record. Hang on.
Please continue. It is live also on YouTube.
Are we right?
1 minute.
Okay.
I can record on my computer, but I have to be admitted. So if that's allowed, then I can do it.
Ah, that's all right. It's just the technology staff changing over, so you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the critical bit. In the gloom of a single standard lamp, a small figure lay on the leather couch, covered by a blanket. Miranda gave a small sob and reached out to touch the body. Oh, Nanny, I'm so sorry. The figure stirred and a white face appeared from under the blanket. Is he gone? Yes, my dear, he's gone for good. Are you all right? Nanny struggled to sit up, tired and a bit sore. My nose hurt something awful. Miranda sighed and looked down at the young girl lying under the blanket. I shall miss you, Nanny, but after all this, I think Australia is the best place for you. But Nanny had already drifted back to sleep. Answer honestly, did you think Nanny was dead?
Yes.
The reader has been following the father-in-law's assumption that body means a dead person, and we now realise he's been tricked. But it's not trick writing, you see. It required careful structuring of the plot, careful building of tension, developing character, careful establishing a sequence of events, the loyalty of the servants, the changes of character, so that right at the end, the reader doesn't feel tricked. They experience delight, not frustration. And we can have a laugh. He was a very nasty man, Martha ventured. We did what we could. She permitted herself a small smile. With any luck, Mrs. Macready will kill him with his dreadful cooking. I want to step outside this particular body in the library because there's nothing terribly absurd about it, and go to another very recent novel, Helen Fitzgerald's Ash Mountain. In this novel, a recurrent character throughout the novel is a very annoying tame ostrich. A catastrophic fire has burnt through the village, killing people and destroying all the buildings. And the ostrich reappears. The aged ostrich was approaching the other side of the reservoir, taking nonchalant, crunchy steps towards the water and bending for a sip. The three of them were half submerged in muddy grime, sobbing, looking up at the fiery sky, silent. But Fran was already making plans. Okay, a word about backstory. This is the invisible part of every scenario. And I have to confess, when I started taking writing novels seriously, I put every bit of backstory into my novels. I'll give you the backstory of the novel of the short story we've just skipped through to tell you. So George, the awful bully, his son was recently killed in an accident. Up until now, the son has managed his father's bullying and lechery, but now that he's gone, his wife is alone in this big house with her children and this terrifying bully. He's assaulted the children's nanny. She grabbed a letter opener. He turned it on her, thought he'd killed her, and fled from the room, leaving Miranda, his daughter-in-law, to handle it. I actually even knew that the butler had been in the war with Miranda's husband and had been a medic and knew how to treat wounds. So that's how he stitched up or bandaged up Nanny and took her down. So all of that was the backstory. But if I'd put it into the story, it would have wobbled all over the place. If I included the detail, all that text, it would have slowed the story down. It becomes boring and obvious. So backstory is the frame of the story we never see, like the frame of a house. The house will fall down if it's not constructed carefully to meet the stresses of wind, heat, cold, and rain. And I think stresses of participants is what I'm thinking of there. So the requirements of a scenario are a solid construction with intrigue, mystery, concealment, surprise, interruptions, tensions, and a bit of a laugh. And I want to give you a very specific example. Peter Corris, in his grunge detective stories, his character walks into his dingy flat, flicks through his mail, and throws it straight into the bin. But his editor told me that before he'd even finished writing that line, Corris knew exactly what was in every piece of that mail: an overdue electricity bill, a scented letter from an ex-lover, a flyer for a dry cleaning store, and a threatening letter from a bill collector. Unbeknownst to the reader, that's why the grungy detective pours himself a shot of whiskey when he had promised a client he'd stay sober. It seems a real character flaw. We lose trust in the supposed hero. We're confused about his motives, which is exactly what the writer intended us to think, all from a carefully controlled and concealed backstory. So remember where we started with the crochet? Bizarre creatures and tools for developing memorable scenarios which can emerge from reading fiction carefully. When you're reading a novel or a short story, notice when something takes you by surprise, when words pop out at you. Examine them carefully to see how the writer created that effect. I know it's stepping behind what the author intends, but it's fair game. I once created, and have some fun, I once created a scenario where one participant, a very pleasant, unassuming school principal, rose through the game to become the Minister for Education. Reader, several years later, he actually did become the Minister for Education for the Australian Capital Territory. And I think he was more surprised than anyone else. So thank you for your patience. I hope it has been useful.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. Our third speaker of the day, Mr. Bharat M. Palavalli, is a co-founder at the Fields of View and Ashoka Fellow, India. Mr. Bharat M. Palavalli researches and designs tools such as games and simulations to make better public policy. For nurturing this innovative idea of designing tools and methods to allow different stakeholders to collaborate on creating relevant and usable policy, Bharat was elected to the prestigious Ashoka Fellowship in 2018. His current work focuses on the policy design and planning in the context of developing countries. So I invite Bharat for his session. Bharat sir, please.
Thank you. Is my screen visible?
Yes, your screen is visible.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Paula. Thanks, Marita and Christine. I think going after both of you has made my life a little simpler because I don't have to explain a lot of things when it comes to what I was going to refer to. The thing with something like culture is even in this room, all of us come from very different backgrounds. So how we define culture, what we think about culture itself is an interesting thing for us to unpack. And in the context of games, at least gaming simulations, Marika, like you rightly pointed out, a lot of it is about the player's experience and what the players do in the game and how they interpret it, despite how much ever we validate or we analytically test our models in the game. The player experience makes a huge difference. So what I'll be doing today is first just setting the tone for what we'll be looking at. I think Marika referred to this twice as well. The idea that the success or failure of a game is dependent on the facilitator as well, right? How they do go about doing the job and their understanding of the culture, so to speak. Similarly, whenever we present results from a game, as a person from India, it's something that is fairly familiar to us. Whenever we submit our results to, let's say, certain publications, the immediate reviewer response that we get is, oh, but how is that valid? Without really understanding the cultural context of the validity of those results, right? So just to set the tone and context for how that plays a role in interpreting results as well, or to even understand how do we go about then designing games, right? To begin with, culture is a very big term, like I mentioned. All of us use it differently. There have been different approaches to studying culture, different ways to understand culture. And it's a term also that has been studied across in these fields, applied very differently. These are a few definitions that I thought that might be interesting for us to look at in terms of how we look at culture itself. Each of them has their own implications when we want to use that setting as a frame to go about doing our work in gaming simulations. Because of the three elements that I talked about, right? How the players interact, what are the artifacts that the players touch in the game? By touch, I mean everything, right? Digital, physical, all the mediums. The second element is that of the model itself in the game. Is that appreciated by the players? And the third element is the facilitation portion. So all three, there are implications on all three when it comes to game design. Quickly to jump through, what that basically means is that there's been no consensus on what culture really is across these disciplines. And it's a large amorphous piece. That's what people are telling us. We all view it very differently. But that does not really mean we can't have a working definition. And one of the funny things is, for whatever reasons, a lot of games have started to use, or gaming simulations have started to use this as the basis when they create their models for the game itself, looking at different pieces. This is just one that they've started to use. I've just put up this as a reference point. This is not the only one when it comes to definition of culture. Though Hofstadter, in one of his publications later, actually acknowledges the fact that while this is done at a national level, culture changes. It is very contextual. It's just to have an understanding overall picture, but then it's not uniform across the country, is something that the Hofstadter acknowledges as well. But these are a few key concepts that are interesting within the ambit of culture. The idea of power distance. How do people negotiate with each other when the power distance is very great? How do they treat information when it is not clear or ambiguous? Or how do they treat or how do they make decisions when it is incomplete information in the system? And do they think long term? Do they think short term? What is their inclination for that? And therefore, then how do you design the gaming simulation to account for these different elements becomes an interesting feature. One of our earliest introductions to something like this was when we were designing a game almost a decade ago on energy. And this was in the context of the Netherlands and India. I'm not sure if Sebas is here, but he's familiar with that particular context where given the cultural differences between the players, where power distance was playing a huge role, we had to change the game drastically because disagreeing with your boss in the game had real world implications for the players. In one context, it was seen as not a problem. It's perfectly fine to disagree with your boss. In another context, it could have implications on your next paycheck. So substantial variation, right? So then you don't want to put the players in such a position in the game. So how do you then go about designing the game? Or the context that in some cases people are have very strong individual belief systems. They are very focused on doing their own thing. They don't necessarily think about collaboration and cooperation on the other end. That's another factor that becomes critical in when you think about designing these models. Sorry, yeah. So why should we be worried about it? Precisely what I've been talking about, because it affects behavior and interpretation, and because in a gaming simulation, how a player treats the information and how they interpret the consequences of their actions is very critical to the outcome in the game itself. The other challenge for us is everything about culture is that it is both an individual construct and a social construct, and which is highlighted further in the context of the game. Because if it is a multiplayer game where different people are playing together, then those interactions and those means of speaking to each other needs to be carefully constructed. Thing with culture is also that over a period of time, it changes, it evolves. I can talk about a couple of examples with our games itself in the next portion. But when that evolves, how do you handle that? Often academic literature is at best 5 years behind, right? When it comes to what is happening because of the nature of how we work and the nature of how we publish things. So do things change in that time period? Or have things changed over the last decade or 2 decades? And when that constant evolution happens, how do you deal with that? The idea of using culture in games and the idea of thinking about culture in this context also is to think about, Marika was sort of alluding to it in terms of the holistic nature as well, and talking about the fact that when we think about culture is the fact that we are not quantifying any of this. We tend to use principles from this area to influence the design process. But is that enough? Or have we done that well enough? Is a question that I think all of us need to ponder over. What I'll be doing is using examples of some of our games. These games have, I'll just quickly run over this because I think we are running a little short on time. These games have both physical and digital games. They've been played across a wide variety of policy contexts. And sorry, I'll just go back up so that you can see the images once more, and then I'll stop here. Yes. Some of these games have been played over 200 times. So we have 200 game sessions, recorded game sessions. The least ones are a little over 20 odd game sessions. And the reason culture keeps coming up in our games and conversations is we played it with 6-year-old kids, upwards of 6-year-olds, to 75-year-old people. We played it with people who are professionals, urban planners at the district level, at the state level, at the national level, officials, administrative officials in the government. We played it with professors, academics. We played it with architects, engineers across the board, energy professionals, depending on the context, disaster management professionals, if it's a training game for them. So a very wide variety of professions as well. Each of them having their own disciplinary background, each of them having their own way of thinking about the problem, and each of them having their own way of interacting with each other as well. Especially to give you 2 quick examples. In one of our games, I think, Paula, this is about something that we also looked at your work and Yuval Portugali's work on urban planning, right? And in one of our games, we get people to build the city that they want to live in. When we give them an open world construct, where the rules are something that they can go ahead and make as they proceed as along, we've seen that children take much easily to this context than adults. Certain bit of universality over there across the board. It doesn't matter which context. Children take much more easily to this, and they're able to play this better. As people grow older, the interaction in the game is not so much about collaboration, but more competition about why did you build something in that space? I wanted to build something in that space. So I think as we grow older, it also reduces in terms of how we interpret the rules, right? The other example of this scenario and where culture comes in is when we played it where power distance let's say, okay, let's forget power distance for now. Let's talk about individualism. When we played it with a context also where people rely on their own, without naming the target players, when we played it with people who are more prone to individualistic decisions, what we've also seen is that they don't necessarily collaborate with each other. They will not speak to each other unless the game forces them to speak to each other, unless the game forces them to collaborate with each other. So this is a very interesting thing for us, because if you're validating plans, urban plans, and there is no construct in the real world that pushes them to collaborate, expecting that to happen in the game world is practically impossible, right? So some of these things keep coming up in many of our games. So I'm drawing on all of these different games. That is close to a dozen games with anywhere between 100 to 150 to 30 runs between each of the games. Sorry. Yeah. These are some of the games. So how does it affect our models? How do we validate our models? I think the nice thing about gaming simulations today is compared to a little over 15 years ago, is that there is a lot of, there's a good body of literature on validation of the models in gaming simulation. But what is missing, the two key pieces that continue to miss is one is temporal validity. By that, I mean the fact that culture changes. How do you validate that portion? The second portion is because gaming simulations are have been so tightly coupled to the process of facilitation. How do you validate that portion? And that is still, I think, that's why I said it was nice that Marika went ahead first, because that is still happening. It's still in the works. So that is one bit. The second bit is as these games are dependent on the players' interpretations, right? Every play session is different. The outcomes are different. So there is a question on universality of play. When you design it for a particular target audience, how does it play out when you play it with a different target audience? Especially when you're designing it with as an objective in for the tool, right? So then how does it change? That's another important element. And Christine, I think when you talked about storytelling, it made my life simple, because I have a few examples from your talk already. Is I think in the comments, somebody, for example, mentioned chai tea or Earl Grey. It's a very funny thing, right? Because when we think about, so if I were facilitating a session of, let's say, certain participants, and if I were to use the term chai tea, I think that session would bomb. Because people in India, a lot of people in India hate the term chai tea, because that's like saying bread. So it's as simple as that. Something as small as that can change how the outcome of this, or the whole outcome of the session, right? So saying bread sounds so funny to many of us, but saying chai tea sounds equally funny to many of us, right? So this is what I mean by context, right? This is what I mean also by when, for example, the story that you had, Christine, as well, the idea of library, right? Doing the body in the library. For many of us in India, library is not a concept that is within the house, right? It's always a public library for many of us, or an institutional library. So when you talk about a body in the library, for me, the setting would have been a school, would have been a public library, not a home, right? So how do we then, so this is what I mean by the cues as well as the boundary objects as well. And this goes all the way down to choice of color. So if we were to choose red, for many people, that would mean danger. for obvious reasons, right? But for many people, red is also auspicious. It's supposed to signify holy, auspicious. So then how do you balance that? So there again, culture comes into play, right? Who's your target audience? What are their cultural preferences? How do you design according to that? The last two pieces are quite interesting because what happens is when there are certain results, when I make a certain move in a game and there are certain consequences for my move in the game, how do I then go about accepting those consequences? And that's a very cultural thing as well, because if I am doing something in the real world and that is validated by certain years of experience, now suddenly you're putting me in a game world where I'm doing something and maybe the same thing happens, maybe something else happens. But then how do I accept those results? Because now I'm playing with my peers, or you are judging me, you are looking at me. How does that work? So I'll unpack the last two bits a little bit more as we move along. This is the acceptance and belief bit. When we've played our games, we've seen that while model fidelity plays a role, it's different with different target audience. When we played with an expert target audience, we've seen that when the numbers match to the T, 3.2345 matches to 3.2345 that they're used to reading on their scales on an everyday basis because they are subject matter experts, then they believe in the game. But with some other audience, when you're playing the same game, to give you an example, the energy context, when we played it with energy planners, the reason they bought into the game was because the numbers and the model was high fidelity. It really sort of captured what they do on an everyday basis. So they believed in the game and therefore they continue to play and make sense of the results. But when we play the same game with a bunch of artists, they completely abhorred the game. They did not like it one bit. It does not matter to them that the model was high fidelity, because for them, what mattered in this context was the fact that these numbers were not numbers that they appreciate on an everyday basis, right? So while model fidelity is crucial, it needs to be coupled with the target audience, who is playing the game and how are they playing the game. We also tend to use the artifacts as sort of a hook for the players. This was what I was referring to when I talked about the color of red as well. For example, in one of our games, we've on waste management, for example, when we use different colored block, we signify waste in different colored blocks, as the picture was there earlier. But then when we changed, we did a play test, or we tested it without the coloring of the blocks. The response was substantially different. How they deal with each other was also substantially different. What we also try to replicate, because we had to replicate the model in the real world, is there are waste workers who sort physically, manually sort and segregate the waste. So we replicated that in the game as a game element. There were waste workers. But one of the things here is, I'll go back to the point that I made earlier. It's about how the players make sense of this, of the artifacts in the game. It's about how it's a player's experience in the game. Very quickly, the waste workers in the game became commodities, which is not the route that we want to take, right? Waste workers should not be treated as commodities. They're people as well. So when you have that as an element, then you need to change the hook, because you're using that in the context of a game. And I'll come back to the very last point on the consequences and the causes of the actions. If players feel that they're being judged by the facilitator or by the game itself, the game is punishing them for doing certain kinds of things, or by their fellow players, how do they treat it? Now, depending on our experience and target audience, we've seen they treat it very differently. In some contexts, if they feel judged by any one of them, especially in context where the power distance is fairly high and where there is a hesitancy for action with ambiguity or with less information, what we've seen that people do is that they take a step back. There's lesser ownership on their own actions. There's lesser ownership in the game, and the results take a massive hit. And that is something that becomes very key then to figure out therefore in your game and in your fellow players and as a facilitator, how do you not judge them? So in the game model, it's fairly simple, right? Not to judge people in the game model, to talk about the consequences in a manner of flow and not a manner of right or wrong. It's fairly simple and straightforward to do. With the facilitator, some additional steps are required. It is about training the facilitator. It is about having the framework in place for the facilitator to follow. So that can be adjusted accordingly. Whereas when it comes to the fellow players or their peers, that's hard. That's not in our control, right? So you only go by the fact that they are going to be judged by their peers, and therefore you change the design in the game so that the amount of judgment that happens does not influence their actions. So you isolate these actions in a very different manner. So that's one way to deal with that. The other thing that we have also done with an example is when you are judged by your peers, what you can do is isolate, as I mentioned, one way to do it is physically isolate them. So these actions take place in different places. But in certain contexts, for example, in disaster management, I think the example that we had yesterday, where you're training them in a large setting, it's not possible to isolate them. It's important that they see what is happening with each other's actions. So in that context, how do you do it? So there, pre-game work becomes important to understand how much of this judging happens. And therefore, in the game model, you ensure that their outcomes don't influence the outcomes of another person. So the amount of interaction touch points that you have in the game, you constantly reduce. That's another way to do it. The easiest thing for us is the easiest way to go about this is the pre-game work to understand the target audience, to understand these different cultural markers, so to speak, of the target audience. Because if it's easiest to design when these elements don't influence each other. That's the last point, that no, or it doesn't affect them. That's the easiest kind of group to design for. How do we go about doing this with our own games is the model design. All of this is an iterative process. And what we do is test it with the target audience separately, with people who have game design expertise separately, and who have subject matter expertise separately. It gives us validation in 3 different ways for obvious reasons. But along with that, what happens is that the model can be tested analytically on its own. And that gives us a lot of leeway to then try out different strategies, try out different pieces. Artifact design is where it's critical and crucial. It makes or breaks a game. An example that I think I already spoke about was also in the context of waste management. When people who were not thinking long term, for example, who were more attuned to thinking short term, when they didn't have the marker of a landfill, how they played the game was substantially different from when they had the marker of a landfill. People who thought long term did not need the landfill as an artifact in the game to think about waste management in a certain manner. Whereas people who thought short term more needed the marker of the landfill to actually think about waste in a more holistic manner. So these sort of artifacts actually play a crucial role in how people make decisions. Another example is we've been always asked for one of our games, why don't we use real world models in the game itself on urban planning? And we've consistently had to explain to the person asking this question that doing so would mean influencing the participant. So of the game on urban planning that I was talking about, an example that I quote quite often, out of close to 200 runs, only less than 5 cities that have been built had police stations in them. That's a wonderful indicator of how people value and think about police on an everyday basis, right? And this is, like I said, across the board, people all the way from 6 up to 70, 80 years old. Different professions and different nationalities, as a matter of fact. So when you have that kind of, now if we were to have a police station, a physical police station in our bank list, then somebody would have seen it and picked it up and placed it in the city. You will never get that observation otherwise, right? Or the fact that when we get them to build without artifacts versus when we get them to build with a road network, how they plan their city is substantially different. So having that artifact in the game changes it completely. When we've given people, for example, a starting map, a physical map, how they've responded to that is completely different. So in one context, we actually gave them a map of Bangalore from the 1960s, and we asked them to build on it. They built the mistakes that Bangalore made between 1960 and 2015. They made all the same mistakes and built a very similar Bangalore, right? Even without that, we've had sessions where they've made the same mistakes, right? So that's why it becomes very critical to think about how we design these artifacts and how we incorporate these artifacts given the cultural setting of the players themselves. I think pre-game and post-game also becomes important in this context. The setting of the context, I think that, Christine, you refer to multiple times as well. When we give our players a briefing session with certain context, the influence that it has on their actions would seem very logical. But like I said, it depends on who the players are. If the players were players who are familiar and who are happy with the quantitative world, when we give them information that just says, for example, in the energy context, when we give them information of the form that by going ahead with this infrastructure project, a large number of people will be displaced. You will lose a lot of ecosystem, you will lose a lot of forest cover. They will not consider that information. It is not important information to them. Whereas when it is people from qualitative backgrounds who are used to dealing with qualitative information or even dealing with ambiguous information, they take that into their decision-making process and change their decisions. With the quantitative people, we've seen that we have to be specific. We have to give them numbers. If you tell them so many people will be affected, even if that is a small number, then it becomes something that goes into the decision-making process. Otherwise, it is not. So therefore, knowing the target audience to design accordingly, especially all of these different artifacts that go into the game, becomes very crucial. So the last bit is facilitation. Like I said, because in gaming simulations, we have sort of tightly coupled the game and facilitation, there are a few challenges. Historically, I think the term facilitation and the way that different publications across ISAGA have treated it, and all the games across ISAGA have treated it, is as facilitation, right? Not as game master. But the interesting thing to think about is cultural context plays a huge role. As I mentioned, in many situations when we have conducted our games, we've had to switch mode to game master because otherwise the participants are not ready to play the game. This is where I think what I mentioned in terms of individualism, in terms of masculinity, all of those elements come into play, because when you set the tone in a certain manner, that is when ownership of the game increases. The second one is fairly critical for us. Again, something that I talk about fairly often. When we play with certain kinds of audience, the facilitators' identity plays a huge role. When we are wearing certain kinds of clothes, when we speak a certain kind of language, the participants tend to take us more seriously. They become more involved. This is again in context where, let's say, the power distance is higher, so on and so forth. Depending on the context, obviously, grasp of the language makes a huge difference, right? But diction and English also plays a role in acceptance of the game. You're automatically seen as an expert with certain audience when you have a better diction, for example. I think the biggest example for this is when my colleague conducts some of these game sessions. If she's wearing a sari, players with a certain cultural background take her more seriously versus when she's not wearing a sari. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, a sari is a form of attire in India. It's a very simple element, but it has a huge outcome. It has a huge effect on the outcome of the game session in itself. The reason class and caste plays a role is also similar. When the name of the facilitator is known to the participants, how seriously they take you plays a big role. This is something that we have learned both the hard way and been prepared for over the last decade or so, because many of our games are used in the context of public policy. So therefore, what happens is you tend to play these games with people from very, very different backgrounds. So therefore, we have to be cognizant of the fact that who is facilitating will dictate the outcomes, because it's not just us who play these games. Our partner organizations use them in the field as well. So when they use them in the field, we have to be aware of the fact that the facilitators come from a certain background, and therefore this is how the participants will view the facilitators. The last bit is on how the game is conducted in itself. Having the game be conducted in an air-conditioned room versus an open hall doesn't seem to be such a big deal, but it makes a big deal when the cultural context of the participants is thrown into the mix. When certain participants need or view that a certain setting is formal, then they also take more ownership on their own actions. With certain kind of participants, they need the space to be informal so that they are comfortable in the space. So understanding how people react to formal spaces and informal spaces and their own inclinations towards formal and informal definitions of formal and informal also plays a role in the outcomes of the game. So I'll end with this, I'll end all the design process with this. If the game is for learning and training, the control that we have is substantially different from when it is for scenario testing versus when it is for data collection. The reason I say that is because the context of learning and training, participants who come in with the objective of learning and training or not learning and training, I would largely categorize the set of participants who come into three groups: people who are eager to learn or to be understand new concepts, people who are fence sitters, who are not sure about why they're here, they're not sure about the medium largely, and the third group is people who would not like to be here at any cost. They're just here because their peers have pressure